Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And it's a great pleasure and honor to be here presenting and having this opportunity to present a bit about our project. This is the image that captures the face of our cultural loss, a consequence of Russia's war against Ukraine. The physical destruction from direct violence is only one facet of a complex, multi-layered damage. Let's situate ourselves geographically. The map above shows Ukraine in the global context. The one below zooms in to show areas affected by Russian military invasions. Purple marks territories occupied since 2014. Red indicates current occupation. Green highlights regions invaded but later liberated, mostly in March, April of 2022. The church you've seen just now, the church in Vyazivka village, built in 1862 and damaged by a Russian missile attack in March 2022, its dome and part of the roof have collapsed, exposing it to decay. Stabilization was still possible. However, the village faced urgent priorities. Multiple buildings had been hit, while at the same time, Russian forces had invaded from the north of the country, operating dangerously close to the area. In 3 years and in the absence of intervention, despite some international attention, the building is now lost. This reflects another layer of war damage, neglect, which is far from slow in the case of a wooden structure, driven by a lack of critical resources, including funding, local expertise and capacity, all worsened by the ongoing conflict and shifting priorities. Those familiar with traditional Ukrainian architecture, church architecture, may notice certain details here that are foreign to it. Specifically, the outlines of the lost OG arch decoration around the windows openings and the distinctive small onion-shaped dome, the small one perched on a subtly flourished drum. They are foreign to the architecture. This observation directs us to the third dimension of cultural loss in the war with Russia, one that extends back centuries, far beyond the recent decades marked by the first annexation and then the current full-scale invasion, and which can be called cultural erasure. When the Ukrainian Cossack hetmanate allied with Sweden was defeated by the Tsardom of Muscovy at the Battle of Poltava in 1709, this was the beginning of the demise of the Ukrainian Cossack state. Muscovy rebranded itself as a Russian empire and increasingly instrumentalized the church as a means of imperial consolidation and ideological assertion. From the mid-19th century onward, published albums of church and bell tower designs, initially as architectural proposals and later as standardized templates officially approved by the Synod, were issued and adopted as prescriptive models for ecclesiastical architecture. The so-called synodal style emerged in Ukraine, blending traditional local forms with architectural details typical for Muscovy, creating churches that mimicked Ukrainian tradition while embedding imperial influence. The wooden churches of Ukraine stand as exceptional examples of vernacular and traditional architecture deeply rooted in centuries of cultural continuity. Numbering over 2,000 within Ukraine's borders, they represent a pinnacle of traditional carpentry and regional identity. At the broadest level, the classification includes approximately 20 distinct types, which then branch into more localized subtypes. The oldest surviving structures date back to the mid-15th to early 16th century. Among them is the St. Nicholas Church in Serednye with parts preserved from as early as 1428. Similarly, the St. Nicholas Church in the village of Kolodna is dated to 1470, and St. Michael's Church from Dorohinka, built in 1520, is now preserved in the open-air museum in Kyiv. Many Ukrainian wooden churches remain understudied or have only been introduced into scholarly discourse in very general terms. The vast majority are virtually unknown internationally. Currently, the most widely recognized are the 16 Ukrainian cerkvas, traditional wooden churches, inscribed on the transboundary UNESCO World Heritage List, 8 located within the borders of Ukraine and 8 within those of Poland. All these belong to the Western Ukrainian architectural tradition, yet they already represent a rich diversity of architectural types. The study of this field has a history going back over 150 years. The churches of right bank Ukraine particularly those in the Carpathian region, have historically received significantly more research attention. These selected publications include, for instance, the recent reprint of Mikhailo Drugan's work on the churches of Western Ukraine, originally published in 1937. The highest one. For a long time, Ukrainian churches in central and right bank Ukraine were virtually inaccessible for research. Stepan Taranushchenko, a noted Ukrainian art historian, was only allowed to publish his seminal study on the wooden sacred architecture of left bank Ukraine in an abridged form in 1967. The first complete edition of his manuscript was published only recently in 2017. Worth mentioning is the work by Titus D. Haverick, who was among the first to introduce Ukrainian wooden churches to Western audiences in 1987. Books by Professor Taras, who devoted a comprehensive typology of Ukrainian wooden churches across the country. As valuable as they are, these studies mostly rely on visual analysis and are occasionally supplemented by hand measurements. A more detailed examination of several wooden churches in the Carpathian region can be found in Andriy Kutny's work, Sacred Wooden Architecture in the Carpathians, published in German in 2009. In recent years, initiatives to document Ukraine's historic architecture have begun to emerge, particularly in response to the full-scale war. One of such initiatives is a project focused on the digital documentation of endangered valuable wooden churches, launched by the Department of Architecture and Conservation at Lviv Polytechnic National University. And it was possible with the support of the Red Arch Cultural Heritage Law and Policy Research. The main criteria for selecting sites was defined by heritage value, architectural typology, threat level, and accessibility, proximity to the front line or enemy border, the risk of artillery strikes. Based on these parameters, 11 wooden churches were selected for the first phase of the study. All of them are monuments of architecture of national importance, representing outstanding examples of Cossack-style vernacular and traditional ecclesiastical design from the late 17th to the late 18th centuries, primarily in the Baroque and neoclassical styles with regional adaptations. 6 of the selected sites were located in areas that had been occupied by Russian forces from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion in March 2022, and were subsequently liberated in April 2022. These include churches in the Chernihiv and Sumy regions. Another 3 churches, in addition to their architectural value, were located close enough to the early front line to be under direct threat in the event of a renewed rapid invasion scenario, as witnessed during the initial weeks of the 2022 escalation. Their proximity to key transport routes and previous patterns of military advance place them at a high risk. The churches in Pechara and Pukhachivka, the lowest ones, although geographically more distant from the active front line, were selected as surviving and representative examples of the classic Cossack Baroque style, preserved with only minor alterations. These monuments exemplify the architectural language and spatial organization characteristic of their typological group, rendering them particularly valuable for comparative analysis and interpretation within the broader framework of Ukrainian wooden ecclesiastical heritage. This layout of the selected sites reflects the core structural and typological principles of traditional Ukrainian wooden church architecture. The churches are constructed as horizontal log structures from squared X-cut timber, employing traditional joinery techniques without the use of nails. In contrast, belfries, which are not depicted here, were often constructed as frame structures to better accommodate the dynamic load and vibrations produced by ringing bells. Most of the churches follow the ancient tripartite plan typical for Ukraine, composed of a nave, a western porch or narthex, and an eastern sanctuary or altar. This scheme became canonical for churches of the Cossack Baroque period and was later altered through stylistic impositions, notably through the addition of volumes and decorative elements derived from Russian synodal architecture. Among the group, 2 churches feature a cruciform plan, a type introduced into wooden architecture in the 17th, 18th century. The most striking example, this marked with blue, is the Holy Trinity Church in today Novomoskovsk, which is its original name is Novosalitsia or Sarmat, as it is an extraordinary wooden structure that emulates the cross in square masonry churches of the princely era. This masterpiece of the Cossack Baroque style, which with its 9 domes and complex centralized composition, stands as the only surviving example of its kind in the history of Ukraine wooden architecture. It ranks among the largest historic wooden log buildings in Europe. It is huge, unbelievably huge, and I'm not even sure if this picture can, represent that. A distinctive feature of this architecture is the absence of superficial decorative elements. Every component serves a structural purpose and contributes to the integrity of the whole. The spatial logic of the building is fully transparent. The height perceived from the outside is preserved and seamlessly revealed in the interior, rising uninterrupted all the way to the uppermost dome. The old-school method of hand measurement using triangulation is still in use and remains sufficient for producing two-dimensional projections, as demonstrated in this recent field drawing of a church in Stankiv-Lviv region. But the goal of our project was to record the sites, capturing as much information as possible. Therefore, we used a 3D scanner. The method involves setting up multiple scanning stations, each capturing data from a different viewpoint, which are later merged into a single point cloud using specialized software. At this particular site, 70 scanning stations were established, with each scan taking between 5 to 20 minutes. In total, the scanning process lasted 12 hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Different scanning resolutions were chosen depending on the distance to the object. Overall, the point cloud density reaches approximately 5 millimeters. The large number of stations was necessary because photogrammetric capture of the building's roofs was not possible. During the martial law, drone flights are prohibited and they are generally unsafe. Therefore, some scanning stations were placed at a considerable distance to allow the domes and roofs of the church to be recorded effectively. One of the advantages of working with a scanner was that the process could be carried out at night. It didn't require any lighting. So this allowed us to witness a magical and highly unusual phenomenon for Ukraine, the glow of the aurora, which appeared while we were working in the field. A combined methodology was employed to enable rapid documentation. The point cloud was captured in grayscale mode, while high-resolution photographic documentation was carried out in parallel for subsequent photogrammetric modeling. Both models can be aligned and merged within specialized software. Let's now take a brief look at the rest of the recorded sites. Presented here is the classic example of a Cossack-era tripartite church crowned with the 3 domes, as it appears following a restoration carried out in the 1990s. During this intervention, the adjoining dissonant bell tower was removed. However, the exonartex remained. Another example of a preserved tripartite 3-dome Cossack church with later dissonant additions that have remained intact to this day. This is a tripartite single dome church distinguished by the barrel-shaped walls of its central nave. The original interior has been completely lost. In the 19th century, the building underwent significant alterations, and at one point, plans were made to dismantle it. However, in the late 1980s, the church was restored, acquiring the form in which it exists today, and it's the point cloud for it. A tripartite single-dome church, largely retaining its authentic character, though likely altered through later additions of modifications to the form of its side arms. The decorative tie beams connecting the log structure of the roof and the lower part of the drum reflect a characteristic construction approach, and the original iconostasis is replaced with a simplified replica today, earlier. This is the tripartite 3-dome church, another rare example of wooden architecture that has survived almost in its original form. The annexes on 3 sides of the church were added in the 19th century. The interior of the church with the original iconostasis no longer present. Originally a single-domed tripartite church, later supplemented with foreign for this architecture bell tower and porticos in the synodal style. Similarly to the sites above, the remaining interior is unusually bare for a Baroque church, most likely due to loss of removal of origin elements, and the original iconostasis is no longer present. This is an original hand-forged window grille preserved there. The first out of our selection, cruciform, St. Nicholas Church in Chernihiv region. The interior has suffered a similar loss as observed in other sites. Another cruciform church in Borohivka, located not far from Novhorod-Siversky. Another tripartite church, Three Domes Church, featuring later added skirt roofs supported by arched galleries, elements highly unusual for central Ukraine. And the last and westernmost site in our selection is a small tripartite church crowned with three domes. And this is the only church in our study where the original royal doors have survived intact. All of the churches in the study were formerly under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate, which had alone prevented access for research. It was only during the ongoing aggression and even then under administrative pressure that access became possible, allowing us to document these sites. Under Russian influence, the churches completely lost their original interior decoration. Iconostasis and ancient icons were removed and replaced, and the rich and vibrant wall paintings once adorned the Baroque churches, and traces of which can still be seen in historical photos and in a few surviving examples in situ. They were destroyed. Today, the walls are simply painted over with oil paint. All liturgical items made of precious metals were taken to Russia. Beyond outright looting, this was yet another means of erasing Ukrainian identity alongside the substitution of authentic architectural forms. One of the most pressing challenges in preserving these churches is humanitarian. The war has claimed many lives and forced many to flee, leaving the churches abandoned and without caretakers. In the 11 parishes included in our study, only 2 to 6 parishioners remain at each site, most of them elderly women who are physically unable to maintain the buildings. Given the pace of unfolding events, digital documentation has become the only viable means of preserving many churches. This demands modern, flexible technology dedicated to research funding and appropriate software solutions. While physical conservation may no longer be possible, we carry the responsibility to record and pass this heritage on to future generations, just as our predecessors passed down their knowledge of many Ukrainian wooden churches that have already been lost today. Ukraine did not choose this path, but now stands at the forefront of defending the free world. The lives of every person who values freedom depend on whether we endure and prevail. Preserving Ukrainian heritage is also a part of this struggle. We are deeply grateful to everyone who supports this cause. Within the framework of the project, we sincerely thank the Red Arch Cultural Heritage Law and Policy Research for funding the 3D scanner for the Department of Architecture and Conservation at Lviv Polytechnics, the Knights of Columbus who assisted with its transportation, the board of this conference for their interest and support, the Temerty Foundation whose generosity made our trip here possible, and our special appreciations go to Yuri Yanchishin, whose tireless support helps us move forward. Thank you very much.
We do have time for questions if anyone has anything for Mariana. Please introduce yourself so that we get to know everyone.
My name is Mariana. I'm a Cuban exile. First, this is not a question per se. I want to thank you and also Sam for your great work. I just wanted to introduce a bit of nuance to the conversation on the topic of funding. Because sometimes conflicts, they're not only wars, sometimes there are internal conflicts in the countries where you have a dictatorship, a repressive government, sometimes it's a totalitarian government, or the military kind of sequesters cultural institutions. So sometimes when we are trying to look for funding or divert funding for preservation of heritage through national institutions, we may be funding institutions that participate actively in the repression of their own civilians. I'm not saying, of course, it's not the case of Ukraine currently, but it may have been before when it was under the umbrella of the Soviet Union. or even you were saying that these churches, you didn't have access before because they were controlled by the Moscow church. And I'm also not saying that it's the case of Sudan, but just to keep in our minds, especially from the US, there's this idea that the US is like the benefactor of the world, and it is in many cases, but just so everyone here keeps in mind that there's a lot of nuance on those intentions, and to always try to find people who share democratic values when we're doing that, and try to fund. There's usually like independent researchers that may not be able to do all the work that would be able to do with the support of the state, of course, but that may be a better place to direct funding. Thank you, and I don't know if you want to add something.
Thank you very much for your interest and for your comment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. It is important to remember that governments are not people. People are not governments. And good work is done by good people in many locations. He came and turned it on, but maybe he turned it off.
How about Genevieve Benyasek? Thank you so much, Mariana. I'm so glad you were able to get here and that you're able to do this work with so much help. And I was curious, as you're going to the sites, or the team goes to the sites for the 3D scanning, are you also collecting any material samples or other information besides the point cloud and the photography?
Thank you, Genevieve. It's very nice to see you, and thank you for the question. Well, that mission, that was a whole big deal because we were going to the sites recently liberated, and we were going with this huge equipment. It takes time to get everything set, and it really took us much time. That night picture of that was us, scanning at night because we were working all day long. So we didn't manage to collect anything because we didn't have at all time, at all. And also it was really close to the front line, so we could hear, all the bombing going, and we were just focused on our work. But we did have that in mind, and the project, as it would be maybe going, we thought of coming back because we've seen those a few parishioners that just are left there. They were very eager to show everything. They showed us all this embroidery they have kept in the churches. So yes, this is another part of the research that had been done. Thank you.
Please, we still have time.
I wanted to follow up on the funding comment. I thought that was a really good comment. And so most of the Sudanese team members at Jebel Barkal do work for the Sudanese government. They work for it's the National Corporation of Antiquities and Museums, and it's a part of the tourism and wildlife. It's like what we have as the Department of Interior in the States. But the money for our project doesn't actually go through any kind of national channel in Sudan. It goes directly to those workers. It is quite complicated during a war often to move money into a country. And so that is something that you have to think about carefully, is how you're going to make that work. And Sudan is completely closed to international banking. It's probably not the case for Ukraine, but but we do sort of a crazy thing where we send money. I can't believe University of Michigan lets us do this, but they have, and State Department was okay with it too. We basically move money into the bank account of a relative that's in the region, like in the UAE or in Egypt or someplace like that. And then they can transfer the money to our Sudanese colleagues with a phone app. The other way that we've been able to do it is with Western Union. I don't even know what that's called, a telegram thing,
Wire transfer?
Wire, yeah. And so We can transfer larger sums through actually moving it through a relative's bank account, but we can transfer like up to $2,000 with Western Union. But the problem then is that somebody has to drive to a Western Union office, and like this is a country that's at war, so you may be driving through active conflict areas. But it's a great point to think about how you actually get money into countries that are at war.
And hopefully also then don't attract the government scrutiny where it may not be wanted.
Yes, and there was another interesting point in your talk about the drone. Because like drones, we use drones so often in cultural heritage documentation, and you really can't use them. You really can't use them during a war. Like even if you can get special permission, it's usually like a bad idea.
Or in
to do
Egypt,
it.
just in
It
general.
won't help you because, everyone is just watching. It doesn't matter if you have the permission, you do not want to get shot.
Exactly, exactly.
And just to comment on this point of money, so in Ukraine, we do have like a free market and everything. And our field, it relies on trust very much. So this thing about transferring to some person can really work, but we do not have these problems because this particular project, it got funding and it got support. But me and Ihor Bokalo, who is present here, and this is like our co-presenting here. So we also work on a number of other projects to discover and explore wooden architecture. And we mostly fund it by ourselves because we are enthusiasts. But to address this, we just established an NGO to be able to move forward with this. So it's rather easy to make things done with the NGOs. Thank you.